Captain Marcus sat at his desk, staring at the mission orders that had just come through. The text was simple: transport the alien prisoner Lyra from Planet Ford to the human-controlled prison station. Mission: high priority. Proceed with caution. His fingers tapped the surface of the desk as he read the words over and over again. It seemed like an easy enough job, but something about it didn't sit right with him. Lyra. The name sent a chill down his spine. She wasn't just any alien prisoner. She was notorious, feared across the galaxy for her ruthless rebellion against the human military. She had led raids against human colonies, and the stories of her cruelty were enough to make even the bravest soldiers hesitate. Now, after being captured in a daring raid, she was being transported for imprisonment, though no one truly knew what to expect from her. Marcus sighed deeply and leaned back in his chair. He had been in the military long enough to understand that these types of missions were never as simple as they seemed. He had dealt with dangerous prisoners before, but none like her. She was dangerous, calculating, and had made her hatred of humans well known. His orders were clear. He was to transport her to the station and deliver her into the hands of the prison authorities. But Marcus couldn't help but wonder what fate had in store for them during this journey. Would she remain docile for the trip, or would she try to escape? She had a reputation for being a master manipulator, and Marcus had been briefed on her ability to twist people's emotions to her advantage. The door to his quarters suddenly opened, and his first officer, Lieutenant Hayes, entered. He didn't have to say anything. Hayes could see the look of concern on Marcus's face. "Captain, are you sure about this?" Hayes asked, his voice low. "Lyra's, well, she's dangerous." Marcus didn't respond right away. Instead, he ran a hand through his short-cropped hair, thinking. Hayes had a point. Everyone in the fleet knew the rumors surrounding her. Lyra wasn't just a prisoner. She was a symbol of defiance. There was something about her that made people fear her, even more than the war itself. "I'm just doing my job," Marcus said, standing up. He turned to face the window, looking out at the stars in the distance. "But this mission feels different, Hayes. I don't know why. Something about it doesn't feel right." Hayes didn't say anything. He simply nodded and left, knowing his captain needed time to think. Later that day, Marcus boarded the ship, the Valor, where Lyra would be held in a high-security cell. As he made his way to the bridge, he couldn't shake the feeling that something important was about to happen. He had transported prisoners before, but none with the kind of reputation that preceded Lyra. When he finally arrived at the holding area, Marcus found her already secured in her cell. She stood near the far wall, her back straight, her expression unreadable. She was an alien, tall and lithe, with sharp features and dark eyes that seemed to pierce through him. Her long black hair flowed like silk around her shoulders, and there was an intensity to her presence that made him wary. "Captain Marcus," she said, her voice cool and smooth. "I hear you're the one tasked with transporting me." Her words were dripping with sarcasm, but Marcus didn't rise to the bait. He simply nodded. "Lyra," he said, his voice steady, "I'll be your escort on this journey. Keep it easy, and we'll get there without any trouble." She laughed softly, a sound that made Marcus's skin crawl. "You think you can stop me? Humans have tried before, and all have failed." Her words were a challenge, and Marcus could feel the weight of them. But he knew better than to rise to the bait. He had dealt with prisoners before, but this felt different. There was something dangerous in the way she spoke, something that told him she wasn't just another prisoner. "I'm not here to fight you," Marcus said, locking eyes with her. "I'm here to do my job. That's it." For a moment, Lyra said nothing. She merely studied him, as if sizing him up. Then, with a casual gesture, she sank back into the chair in her cell, crossing her arms. "Very well, Captain," she said with a smirk. "But don't think for a second that I will make this easy for you." Marcus turned to leave, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this assignment than met the eye. He didn't know why, but something deep inside him told him this journey was going to change everything. For both of them. As he made his way to the bridge, he couldn't help but wonder if destiny had something in store for him, and for the alien prisoner whose hatred for humanity was legendary. What would happen between them over the course of this mission? Would they remain enemies, or would something unexpected unfold? Only time would tell. The days stretched on, and Marcus found himself caught in an unexpected struggle. The journey was long, but it wasn't the travel that was bothering him. It was Lyra. Every conversation, every glance, every word she spoke seemed designed to provoke him. Her hatred for humans was apparent in every interaction, and she made no effort to hide it. But there was something else too. Something that caught Marcus's attention despite his best efforts to stay focused on the mission. Lyra's eyes, dark and piercing, held a strange depth. There were moments when Marcus thought he saw more than just anger in them, more than just the bitterness of a prisoner. There were flashes of pain, of memories too heavy to carry. Yet she kept that part hidden, locked away behind her walls of hatred. He tried to keep his distance, to focus on his duties, but every time he looked at her, he couldn't help but wonder, what had happened to make her this way? What had pushed her to hate humanity so completely? On the fourth day, Marcus made an attempt to speak with her. He had hoped the silence between them could end, at least for a moment. They were both stuck in this small spaceship for the long haul, and he wasn't about to let her make it unbearable. He walked up to the holding cell, where Lyra stood, staring out the small window at the vast expanse of stars. She didn't turn to acknowledge him as he approached, and for a moment, he wondered if she even knew he was there. But then, just as he was about to speak, she broke the silence. "You know," she began, her voice quiet but cold, "I never wanted this, never wanted to be in your hands." Marcus frowned but didn't reply right away. He had heard her bitterness before, but this time, there was something different in her tone. She sounded tired. "I didn't ask for this life," Lyra continued, her gaze still fixed on the stars. "I didn't ask to lead a rebellion. I didn't ask to lose everything." Marcus hesitated. For the first time, he saw a crack in her walls. "You lost everything?" he asked, his voice gentle, though he didn't expect much of an answer. Lyra turned toward him then, her dark eyes locking onto his. There was a flicker of something, a brief flash of vulnerability, before her expression hardened again. "Yes," she said flatly, her voice laced with bitterness. "I lost my home, my family, my people, everything that mattered." Marcus could feel the weight of her words, and for a brief moment, the animosity between them seemed to fade. He didn't know if it was because of the circumstances or because of the shared isolation they both felt, but he found himself wanting to know more. "You don't have to keep hating humans," Marcus said carefully. "Not all of us are your enemies. I'm not your enemy." Lyra's eyes narrowed, her jaw tightening. "You wouldn't understand. Your kind destroyed my world. You didn't just invade, you took everything. You didn't leave us with anything but ruin." Marcus felt a pang of guilt. He had heard the stories, seen the reports. Human forces had attacked alien worlds, taking control of resources, claiming victory in the war. It wasn't something he was proud of, but it was the reality of their galaxy. He wasn't sure what he expected from her, but her words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and painful. Yet he wasn't backing down. He couldn't. "I'm sorry for what happened to your people," Marcus said quietly, his voice sincere. "I can't change the past, but I'm not here to make things worse for you. I'm just doing my job. And I don't want to see you suffer more than you already have." Lyra scoffed, but this time, it didn't seem as sharp. She turned away, her back facing him once again. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick, but it was different now. There was no anger in the air, only something quieter. Marcus took a step forward, but before he could say anything else, Lyra spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why do you care?" she asked. "You're just like the rest of them, a soldier following orders. You don't know what it's like to lose everything." Marcus's heart clenched. He did know what it was like. He had lost people too, people who mattered to him. It wasn't the same, but it hurt just as much. "I don't know what it's like to be you," he admitted, "but I know what it's like to lose someone, to lose everything. And maybe that's why I can see that there's more to you than just hatred. I see it in your eyes." Lyra turned slowly, meeting his gaze for a long moment. There was something in her eyes now, something softer, less guarded. "Maybe you're right," she said quietly. "Maybe there's more to me than just the anger." Marcus nodded, not sure where this conversation was going, but he knew it was a step in the right direction. This mission wasn't just about transporting a prisoner anymore. It was about something deeper, something that neither of them had expected. Lyra might still hate him. She might still hate all humans, but something had changed between them. There was a crack in her armor, and Marcus wasn't going to give up on finding out what lay behind it. As the days passed, the tension between them slowly began to ease. The hatred was still there, but it wasn't as consuming. And for the first time, Marcus began to wonder if there was a way forward, a way where the two of them could find some sort of understanding, even if only for a brief moment in time. The road ahead was still uncertain, but Marcus was determined to see it through. For Lyra, and for himself. They were no longer just captain and prisoner. They were something more, something that neither of them could quite define yet. But they were starting to trust each other, and that was enough for now. The journey had taken an unexpected turn. Marcus couldn't deny that the days felt different now. The tension that once filled the air had faded, replaced by a strange, uneasy quiet. Lyra was still a prisoner, and he was still her captor. But their conversations had begun to shift in a way neither of them had anticipated. The walls that had separated them seemed to crumble just a little bit more with each passing day. For the first time, Marcus didn't just see Lyra as the alien rebel she was known to be. He saw a person. Someone who had lost everything, who was carrying more pain than he could imagine. And Lyra, though she hadn't shown it in front of him, was starting to look at him differently too. It wasn't just about hatred anymore. There was a new layer to their relationship, something he couldn't quite put into words. And though the mission was still the same, transport the prisoner to the station, it no longer felt like just a simple task. There was more at stake now. Marcus stood at the controls of the Valor, staring out at the endless sea of stars. They were getting closer to their destination, the human-controlled prison station, and the thought made his stomach twist. He wasn't sure what would happen when they arrived. Would Lyra simply be handed over, her rage contained behind a cold metal door? Or would something else happen, something neither of them had foreseen? He didn't know, but one thing was certain. He couldn't stop thinking about her. She was in the holding cell again, pacing the small space. She looked out of the small window every now and then, her eyes narrowing, as if searching for something far beyond the stars. It was a sight Marcus had grown used to, though it always made him wonder what was going through her mind. He turned to leave the bridge, but stopped when he saw Hayes standing by the door. His first officer looked at him with a questioning expression. "Captain," Hayes said, his tone serious, "I know this mission's been unusual, but we need to stay focused. We're almost there. We can't let anything distract us." Marcus nodded but didn't respond. Hayes wasn't wrong. They were getting close to the station, but that didn't change the fact that something inside him had shifted. He couldn't ignore it, no matter how hard he tried. "I'll be in the holding area," Marcus said, walking past Hayes and heading toward the back of the ship. Lyra was sitting on the bench when he entered, her posture as rigid as ever. She didn't look up as he approached, and Marcus hesitated for a moment. He wasn't sure what to say. Their last conversation had been different, more open, but now he didn't know if it had made any real difference. "You're quiet today," Marcus said, his voice casual, though he couldn't hide the curiosity in his tone. Lyra didn't answer right away. She just stared out the small window again, her eyes fixed on the stars beyond. "I don't know what you want from me, Marcus," she said finally, her voice barely audible. I don't know why you're trying to make this easier. Marcus frowned. I'm not trying to make it easier. I'm just trying to make it bearable. For both of us. Lyra snorted but didn't look at him. Bearable? You think any of this will ever be bearable for me? You humans took everything from me. I know, Marcus replied, his voice steady. I know it's hard. I know you feel betrayed. But I'm not like the others. I'm not part of the military you fought against. I'm just trying to do my job. I'm not your enemy. For a long moment, there was silence. Then Lyra turned to look at him, her eyes softening just the slightest bit. Why do you care? Marcus met her gaze, his expression serious. Because I've seen people lose everything. I know what it's like to feel helpless, to feel like the world is against you. I've lost people, too. There was a long pause as Lyra took in his words. She looked away again, her gaze distant. You don't know me, Marcus. You don't know what I've been through. I don't, Marcus admitted. But I'm starting to understand a little more. Lyra's eyes flickered toward him again, her expression unreadable. There was a hint of something there, something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Marcus took a deep breath. I don't want anything from you, Lyra. I just want to understand. I just want you to know that not every human is your enemy. We're not all the same. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. You expect me to believe that? After everything? Marcus didn't have an answer. He knew it was a lot to ask, to expect her to suddenly trust him after everything that had happened. But maybe, just maybe, they could start to find some common ground. Maybe they could find a way to work together, even if it was just for the duration of the journey. We don't have to agree, Marcus said finally. But we can still be civil, can't we? We don't have to be enemies. Lyra was silent for a long moment. Then, without a word, she stood up and walked over to the small table in the corner of the cell, turning her back to him. I don't know if I can ever see you as anything but my enemy, she said softly. But I'll try. For now. It wasn't much, but it was something. And in that moment, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. They had come further than he expected. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. This journey was far from over. There was more to Lyra than just anger, and Marcus was beginning to see that. But as they approached the prison station, he knew the real test was just about to begin. Would they truly find common ground, or would their differences tear them apart? Only time would tell. The Valor glided silently through the vast emptiness of space, its engines hum barely audible in the sterile quiet. Marcus sat in his captain's chair, staring at the control panel, though his thoughts were miles away. They were nearing the prison station, and with each passing moment, the weight of the mission pressed heavier on his chest. Soon, Lyra would be handed over, her fate sealed, and he would be free of this burden. Or so he thought. A soft ping interrupted his thoughts, and he glanced down at the small screen. It was a message from Hayes, his first officer. Captain, we're coming up on the station. It's time, the message read, simple and to the point. Marcus nodded to himself. He had known this day would come, but he hadn't expected the mix of emotions that now churned inside him. He had spent days trying to keep a professional distance, to remind himself that Lyra was just another prisoner, another mission. But the truth was, she wasn't just another prisoner. She had become something more. For the first time since their journey began, Marcus felt uncertain about what would happen when they arrived. What would Lyra's fate be once she was handed over? Would she be locked away forever, just another casualty of war? Or would something else happen? Something he couldn't predict. He stood up, walking briskly toward the back of the ship. He needed to see her one last time before they reached the station. He needed to know if there was anything more he could do. Lyra was sitting on her cot, her back straight, her expression unreadable. The moment Marcus stepped into the holding area, her eyes flicked toward him, sharp and full of suspicion. "You're here to take me to my cage, aren't you?" she asked, her voice low but steady. Marcus hesitated, caught off guard by the coldness in her tone. He had expected anger, yes, but not this sense of finality. "Lyra," he started, but the words caught in his throat. How could he explain everything he was feeling when he didn't fully understand it himself? "Don't waste your time," she interrupted, standing up and pacing the small space. "You humans always talk about peace, about understanding. But in the end, all you want is to lock us away and forget about us." Her words stung more than Marcus cared to admit, but he pushed past the hurt. "That's not what I want. I'm not the enemy, Lyra. I'm just a man trying to do what's right." Lyra stopped pacing and turned to face him. Her eyes narrowed. "What's right? To imprison people like me. To condemn us for what we believe in." Marcus swallowed hard, struggling to find the right words. "I can't change everything that's happened, but I can't just stand by and let you be thrown away without a second thought. You deserve better than that." For a long moment, they stood in silence, the weight of their words hanging heavily in the air. Marcus wasn't sure if she was even listening anymore, but he continued. "I don't know what will happen when we reach the station. I don't know what they'll do with you. But I promise I'll do everything I can to make sure it's fair." Lyra's gaze softened slightly, but she didn't speak. Instead, she walked over to the small window and stared out at the approaching station, the massive structure looming like a fortress in the distance. "I never asked for this," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I never wanted to be part of this war." Marcus didn't know what to say. He had heard stories about the rebellion, about the alien races who fought against human control, but he had never really considered the people behind the stories. They weren't just enemies. They were individuals, each with their own hopes, fears, and dreams. And Lyra, despite everything she had done, everything she had been forced to become, was no different. "I know," he said softly. "I can't imagine what you've been through. But I'm not your enemy, Lyra. I'm just a man trying to do what's right." For the first time, Lyra looked at him as if seeing him for who he truly was, a person, not just a soldier. "And what if doing what's right means defying your orders?" she asked, her voice quiet but full of meaning. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He had never thought about it that way. His orders had been clear: transport the prisoner and deliver her to the station. But now, standing before Lyra, he wasn't sure if following those orders was the right thing to do. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, the ship's intercom crackled to life. "Captain, we've reached the station. We're in docking range." Hayes's voice rang through the speakers. The moment had arrived. The decision he had been avoiding, the choice he had been dreading, was here. Marcus looked at Lyra, his eyes searching hers for any sign of hope, any sign that there was more to their journey than just the inevitable end. But all he saw was uncertainty, uncertainty that mirrored his own. "I have to go," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "It's time." Lyra didn't answer. She simply nodded once, a quiet resignation settling over her. There was nothing more to say. As Marcus turned and left the holding area, he felt a strange sense of finality, but also something else, something he couldn't quite place. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time, he felt like he was making the right choice. The Valor docked with the station, the soft thud of the connection echoing through the ship. Marcus took a deep breath as he made his way to the airlock, preparing for what would come next. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: his mission had changed, and so had he. The airlock hissed as the door slid open, revealing the cold, sterile docking bay of the prison station. Marcus stood at the threshold, his boots heavy against the floor, his heart pounding in his chest. He had done his best to convince himself that this was just another mission, another task to complete. But now, standing at the edge of the unknown, the weight of his decision hit him like a ton of bricks. Behind him, Lyra stood silently, her eyes fixed on the station ahead. She had been quiet ever since he left the holding area, her demeanor closed off and unreadable. Marcus didn't blame her. After everything that had happened, he wasn't sure how he could make her trust him, or if he even deserved it. "Captain, we're all set." Hayes's voice crackled over the comms, breaking the silence. "The station's ready for docking. We're on your schedule." Marcus nodded, his thoughts racing. He didn't want to let her go. That was the truth, no matter how much he tried to deny it. The mission had started out simple enough: transport the prisoner, deliver her to the station, and move on. But now, as the reality of their situation sank in, he realized how much more complicated it had become. Lyra hadn't asked for any of this. She hadn't chosen to be part of the war. She hadn't chosen to be captured and thrown into the hands of a stranger who now had to make a choice, one that could change everything. The problem was, Marcus wasn't sure what the right choice was anymore. His orders were clear, but his conscience, that was a different story. "Let's go," Marcus said, his voice steady, though inside, his stomach twisted with uncertainty. He turned and began walking toward the docking area. Lyra followed closely behind, her steps measured and cautious. Neither of them spoke as they moved down the narrow corridor. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the silence, a constant reminder of the decision that loomed ahead. As they reached the docking bay, Marcus took a deep breath and stopped. He turned to face Lyra, who had been quiet for the entire journey. Her eyes, once filled with anger, now held something else, something harder to decipher. But there was still a trace of distrust, a wall that seemed impossible to break. "Lyra," Marcus began, his voice soft but firm. "You don't have to go through with this. You don't have to be handed over to the station." Lyra's gaze met his, and for a moment, he saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a mix of surprise and hope. It disappeared as quickly as it had come, replaced by the hardened expression that had been there since the beginning. She shook her head slowly. "Do you think I have a choice?" she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have your orders. I'm just a prisoner. I'm not important." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "That's not true. You're more than just a prisoner. You're a person, and I won't let you be forgotten." For a long moment, Lyra said nothing. She looked at the station, her face unreadable. Finally, she spoke again, her voice cold and distant. "Even if you wanted to help me, it wouldn't matter. Once I'm handed over, it's over. There's nothing you can do." Marcus clenched his fists, the frustration building inside him. "I'm not giving up on you, Lyra. I won't just leave you here. I can't." Lyra's eyes softened for a brief moment, and then she looked away, her expression guarded once more. "You can't change anything. The war will go on, and I'll be just another casualty. That's the way it is, and I've accepted it." The words stung, but Marcus refused to back down. He had seen the humanity in Lyra, the strength, the courage, and the fear that she had kept hidden behind a wall of hatred. She wasn't just another enemy. She wasn't just another prisoner to be forgotten. She was a person who had been shaped by circumstances beyond her control, just like him. "Lyra," he said, taking a step closer, his voice urgent, "I can't promise you everything, but I can promise that I won't just hand you over to them without a fight." For the first time, Lyra looked at him directly, her eyes searching his face for any sign that he was serious. For a moment, Marcus thought she might say something, anything, but she didn't. She simply turned toward the station again, her expression unreadable. "I don't need saving," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I just need this to be over." Marcus didn't know how to respond to that. He had always believed in fighting for what was right, but this felt different. How could he save someone who didn't want saving? How could he fight for a cause that seemed doomed from the start? The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted his thoughts, and he turned to see Hayes and the rest of the crew coming down the corridor. They had their orders, and they had done their duty. But Marcus knew that his duty was not just to follow orders. It was to do what he believed was right. "We're ready, Captain," Hayes said, glancing at Lyra. Marcus nodded slowly. "No," he said, his voice steady, resolute. "We're not ready. Not yet." Lyra looked at him, her eyes wide with confusion. "What are you doing?" "I'm not handing you over," Marcus said, his voice firm. "I'm not letting you be thrown away like this. We're getting out of here." The decision was made. The mission was no longer just about orders. It was about doing what he knew was right. And Marcus knew, deep down, that this was the beginning of something much bigger than either of them could have ever imagined. Marcus's heart raced as the decision echoed in his mind. He wasn't just making a choice to defy orders anymore. He was choosing to change the course of everything. There was no turning back now. "Captain, what are you doing?" Hayes asked, his voice tense with confusion and concern. "We can't just abandon the mission. We have our orders." Marcus turned to face his crew, his jaw tight and his eyes determined. "We're not abandoning anyone. We're taking Lyra with us." There was a brief, stunned silence. Hayes, along with the rest of the crew, exchanged glances. The tension in the room thickened. It wasn't just an order they were defying. It was their duty. No one had ever disobeyed orders like this. Not on a mission so important. But Marcus had made his choice. "Are you out of your mind?" Hayes finally demanded, his voice rising with disbelief. "This is crazy. If we do this, we'll be labeled as traitors. You know what they'll do to us." "I don't care," Marcus said, his voice unwavering. He glanced over at Lyra, who had been silent throughout the conversation. She stood against the wall, her arms crossed, watching him with a mixture of skepticism and something he couldn't quite name. It was as if she was trying to understand if he truly meant what he was saying. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why would you do this?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He didn't know if he had a perfect answer. But he knew it had to be done. "I can't let you go, Lyra. Not like this. You don't deserve to be thrown away," Marcus replied, his tone softer now. "No matter what happened between our people, you're still a person, and I won't let you be locked away and forgotten." Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with wariness. "You're willing to risk everything for me? A prisoner?" "Yes," Marcus replied, his voice firm. "Because you're more than that." Hayes stepped forward, his face grim. "Captain, you can't be serious. We'll be hunted. The Federation won't let this slide." "I'm not asking for permission," Marcus said, his eyes locking with Hayes. "We're leaving. If you want to stay, then go. But I'm taking her with me." The room was still for a moment. Then, slowly, Hayes lowered his gaze, his shoulders slumping. He was still unsure, still questioning, but he knew Marcus wasn't going to back down. One by one, the crew members seemed to come to a reluctant understanding. They had their orders, but Marcus had made his stand, and they knew him too well to doubt his resolve. "All right," Hayes said with a sigh. "Let's get this over with." The tension began to shift. They were all in this together now, and no matter how uncertain they had to move forward. Marcus turned back to Lyra. "Come on. We don't have much time. We're going to need to move fast." Lyra eyed him warily but said nothing. She followed him as he led the way out of the docking bay and down the narrow corridor that would take them to the ship. The sound of their footsteps was the only thing that filled the silence between them. For a moment, Marcus thought she might speak, ask him why he was doing this or what he hoped to accomplish. But she said nothing, her expression unreadable. The crew worked quickly to make sure everything was in place for the ship's departure. Marcus was at the helm, his fingers flying over the control panels, setting their course. His mind raced with possibilities, with doubts. He had no plan beyond getting away. He had no idea how long they could evade pursuit. All he knew was that this was the only option left. As the ship powered up, Marcus glanced over at Lyra, who had taken a seat in the corner, her eyes closed. Her hands were clenched into fists, as if she were fighting against something inside herself. He couldn't blame her for being suspicious. She didn't trust him. And why should she? She had been betrayed too many times before. But something about her, something in the way she carried herself, made Marcus believe she was capable of more than just hate. There was a pain inside her, a pain that he hoped could be healed. The ship's engines roared to life, and Marcus set them on a course to the nearest uninhabited planet. He had no idea what they would do once they got there, but it was the only place where they might be able to hide, at least for a while. As they left the station behind, Marcus couldn't help but look back at the distant lights fading into the void of space. The mission was over, and a new chapter had begun. He wasn't sure where it would lead, but he was certain of one thing. He wasn't going to regret this. "Captain," Hayes's voice came over the comms. "We're in the clear for now, but they'll come after us. We need a plan." "I know," Marcus replied, staring out into the vast emptiness of space. "We'll figure it out, one step at a time." But as the ship sailed through the blackness of space, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they had already crossed a line, and there was no turning back. The danger they were in was only just beginning. The ship hummed softly as it soared through the quiet emptiness of space. The stars outside flickered like distant beacons, offering a strange sense of calm in the midst of the chaos Marcus had just unleashed. His hands gripped the steering wheel, his mind racing with the gravity of their situation. They had taken the leap, and there was no going back now. Lyra sat across from him, her eyes trained on the viewport, her arms folded across her chest. She had been quiet ever since their escape from the station. The tension between them was palpable, but Marcus didn't expect her to suddenly warm up to him. Trust didn't work like that, especially not when someone had been wronged as much as she had. But Marcus wasn't thinking about that right now. They had bigger problems. "We're going to need supplies," Hayes said from behind, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "You can't outrun the Federation forever. We need to find a place to hide, a place where they won't track us." Marcus nodded. "I know. I'll set a course for the nearest uninhabited planet. It should be far enough out of their range to give us some time." "I hope you're right," Hayes replied, his tone skeptical. "The Federation doesn't give up easily. If they come after us, we won't be able to outrun them for long." "We'll manage," Marcus said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. The truth was, he had no idea how long they could survive on the run. He had no plan beyond getting them somewhere safe, but he couldn't think about that now. The first step was getting them to that planet. The ship's engines hummed as Marcus adjusted their course. The view outside the window shifted, the stars becoming streaks of light as they sped further into the unknown. The ship was built for long-range travel, but they had pushed it to its limits. There was no telling how long it would take before the engines gave out, or worse, before they were found. Lyra shifted in her seat, her gaze never leaving the stars. For a long time, she hadn't said a word. But now, she turned her head slightly, her voice softer than it had been before. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Her eyes were still filled with suspicion, but there was something else there, too. Curiosity, a flicker of hope, perhaps. Marcus sighed. "Because you deserve better than being thrown away like trash. Because, despite everything, I don't believe you're just the enemy." Lyra looked at him, her eyes narrowing. She was searching for something in his face, some sign that he wasn't just another person trying to use her. But she didn't find what she was looking for. "Why should I trust you?" she asked. "Why should I believe that you're any different from the rest of them?" Marcus met her gaze, unwavering. "Because I'm giving you a choice. Because I'm giving you the chance to make your own decisions, instead of having someone else make them for you." She didn't respond right away. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Marcus couldn't blame her for doubting him. He hadn't earned her trust, but he wasn't going to stop trying. A soft beeping interrupted their conversation. Marcus quickly glanced at the console. They were nearing their destination, a small, uninhabited planet, perfect for hiding, at least for a while. "We're almost there," Marcus said, his voice steady. Get ready. We'll need to find shelter, food, and water. We can't stay on this ship for long." Lyra stood and walked over to the viewport, her expression unreadable. She didn't look at him as she spoke. "Do you really think you can change anything? Do you think one person, even you, can make a difference?" "I have to believe I can," Marcus said quietly. "Otherwise, what's the point?" Lyra glanced at him then, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something, uncertainty, maybe even hope, in her eyes. She didn't speak, but she didn't turn away either. The tension between them was still there, but it felt different now. It wasn't just hostility, it was something more complex. The planet came into view, its surface a mix of rocky mountains and vast, empty plains. They would have to land carefully, but it was a place they could disappear into for a while. "Here we go," Marcus muttered, setting the ship on a descent course. The crew worked together in silence, preparing for the landing. Lyra stood by, watching them with quiet intensity. Her presence was heavy, but not in a threatening way. She was a mystery still, but one that Marcus was determined to solve. The ship touched down on the barren surface with a soft thud. Marcus exhaled, relieved. But the real work had just begun. They had no idea what challenges lay ahead, but at least for now, they had a chance. "All right," Marcus said, turning to the crew. "We've made it. Let's get to work. We've got a lot to do." The crew filed out, gathering supplies and preparing to set up a base. Marcus stayed behind for a moment, looking out at the vast, empty landscape. For the first time since he had made his decision, he felt a strange sense of peace. Lyra joined him, standing beside him as they looked out at the horizon. "Do you think this will work?" she asked softly. "I don't know," Marcus replied honestly. "But we have to try." And for the first time, Lyra didn't pull away. She stayed, her presence a quiet, tentative reminder that they were both choosing something different now. A new beginning. Together.